We live in a noisy age. Everyone wants to be seen, to be heard, to be recognized. People say the more you express, the more you're worth. But the more we try to be noticed, the more we lose ourselves. Every hasty reply, every effort to explain just to please someone, all are signs of an unsettled mind. But there will come a time when you realize true allure doesn't come from speaking more or seeming important. It comes from silence at the right moment. From the way you resist being pulled by anger, from how you don't react to provocation. People begin to listen to you when you stop trying to be heard. When you no longer react on impulse, you begin to choose. And when you choose instead of react, you begin to take control of your life. That is what Stoic philosophy has taught for centuries, and today, perhaps it's time you live this way. Calm, deep, and unshakable. 1. Non-reaction creates natural magnetism. There are people who draw attention without doing much. They're not the loudest in the room, not the ones laughing the hardest or acting the strangest. They're simply present, and that presence changes the space around them. No noise, no show, just calm and steadiness. That's what makes them stand out in a world addicted to speed and reaction. We call them charismatic, or say they have a strong presence. But few recognize that their appeal doesn't come from communication skills or fashion sense. It comes from within, from the ability to regulate emotion and not react on impulse. In modern life, reacting has become almost automatic. We react to a late email, to a rude comment online, to criticism, to judgmental stares. We feel compelled to reply, to retaliate, to prove we're right. And the more we react, the more we lose control. People often mistake reactivity for strength, but in truth, it signals inner instability. When you're dragged by emotions, anger, hurt, panic, or insecurity, you let the outer world govern your inner one. And when that happens, you're no longer leading your life. You become a product of your environment, of circumstances, of other people. By contrast, the one who doesn't react right away, who pauses, observes, stays silent, and only responds when necessary, is the one quietly holding power. They don't get swept up in someone else's agitation. They don't lose composure over careless words. Their stillness doesn't stem from indifference, but from a depth forged by discipline. Because they don't react, they become harder to read, harder to manipulate, harder to move. And that makes them magnetic, even mysterious. A man or woman who doesn't lash out when provoked, who doesn't lose direction amid chaos, who doesn't let emotion dictate speech. Such a person radiates safety to those around them. They carry no frantic energy, no tension that puts others on guard. They are a still point in a turbulent world, and that draws people in. You may not remember the loudest speaker in a meeting, but you'll recall the one who sat quietly, observed, and spoke only once with words that carried weight. You may not be impressed by the person who reacts wildly on social media, but you'll remember the one who refused to get swept into the storm, who chose silence with resolve. That's attraction without effort, presence without performance. Stoicism calls this the virtue of self-mastery, when you refuse to let external chaos govern internal peace. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the one who remains calm in the storm has already conquered himself. This person doesn't live to meet expectations, doesn't speak to please, doesn't act to be seen. They live by reason, by core values, and respond with intention. And that, in itself, creates a wordless appeal, one that can't be imitated. There's a paradox. The less you react, the more unpredictable you become. The more timely your silence, the more people pay attention. When you no longer rush to speak, When you don't feel the need to join every conversation, every word you choose gains impact. People start listening to you not because you talk often, but because they sense the strength behind what you say. And that an appeal born not from effort, but from restraint is one of the clearest expressions of inner freedom. To not react doesn't mean you don't feel. It means you feel without letting feelings steer you. You still grieve, get angry, feel anxious like anyone else, but you learn to place distance between emotion and action. You can acknowledge what you feel without letting it sweep you away. In that space, the pause between trigger and response, you discover power. And in that very silence, others discover something compelling about you. So, if you want to become more magnetic in a world that won't stop shouting, don't try to talk louder. Learn to not react. Start by pausing for a moment when someone says something unpleasant. Take a deep breath instead of replying too fast. Give yourself some space and then decide whether it's even worth responding. What matters will remain after a pause. What's empty will fall away on its own. And you, the one who paused, will stand apart. Not because you tried to, but because you refused to be pulled into the trivial. 2. When you don't react, you make others stop. In a world where speed and quick reactions are mistaken for intelligence, pausing even for a moment feels strangely unfamiliar. But that unfamiliarity draws attention, because when everyone else reacts on instinct, the one who doesn't creates a silence that stands out, pulling all eyes toward them. Not because they tried to be different, but because they didn't do what everyone else did. React hastily. Reaction is hardwired into us. Run when threatened, speak when insulted, argue when misunderstood. But maturity begins the moment we realize not every situation deserves a response. People often think silence in conflict means weakness, but in truth, it's the peak of inner strength. When you choose not to answer a jab, not to entertain disrespect, not to join a meaningless battle, you preserve your own peace and force both your opponent and the onlookers to reevaluate. Here's a simple truth most overlook. The faster someone reacts, the easier they are to control. If someone can throw you off balance with a word or a look, they hold power over you not by force, but by your own reaction. But if you refuse to play their game, if you don't get angry, don't argue, don't appear wounded, the power instantly shifts. They're left without a script. They falter. And in that moment, without saying a word, you've made them stop, look inward, and wonder, why didn't this person react? This isn't just a way to guard your peace, it's a way to teach others how to treat you. When you don't meet rudeness with rudeness, you make it clear you're not playing on the same level. When you don't over-explain to someone unwilling to understand, you show the futility of their game. When you don't shout in an argument but simply look them in the eye, stay calm, and remain silent, you don't lose. You're setting the tempo. And once you hold that rhythm, everything moves at your pace. In a group, a relationship, a workplace, the one who remains calm commands more respect than the one who explodes. Because they're hard to read, and in that mystery, there's power. When you can't be easily provoked, you can't be easily manipulated. When you don't rush to explain, people listen more carefully when you finally speak. Timely silence isn't the absence of a voice, it's a statement made without noise. And sometimes that silence speaks loudest. You don't have to win every argument to be heard. Sometimes your refusal to even join it declares more than words ever could. That you won't lower yourself into a pointless battle. You make them stop not with threats or dominance, but with the steadiness they can't rattle. And once people sense that about you, they cannot help but respect it. 3. Boundaries command respect. We often confuse kindness with people-pleasing. In the fear of being rejected, judged, or labeled as difficult, many lose their boundaries. They say yes when they truly mean no. Accept what doesn't align just to keep surface harmony, and slowly trade inner peace for the comfort of others. But the truth is, those without clear boundaries are not more respected. On the contrary, they're often taken lightly, not because they lack value, but because they fail to protect that value through limits. Setting boundaries doesn't mean building cold walls to shut out the world. It's simply clarity of mind. What's acceptable and what's not. What nourishes you and what drains you. A person with boundaries doesn't need to assert loudly or reject with anger. They only need to be steady, clear, and consistent about what they allow into their life. And interestingly, when you calmly respect your own boundaries, others begin to respect you without being told to. You may think that declining an invitation, ignoring an after-hours call, or saying no to a friend's request will make you seem selfish or distant. But the truth is, if you're always available, never say no. Never stop even when overwhelmed people begin to assume you're always there, always ready, and that no side is required in dealing with you. Because you don't demand respect, they feel no need to offer it, and eventually you'll feel drained, hurt, even angry, not because people are bad, but because you never set the line from the start. One of the clearest signs of self-control is the ability to say no without guilt. That's when you understand that declining doesn't make you cold, it shows you understand the value of your time, your health, and your peace of mind. When you turn down a meeting because you need rest, or reject an unreasonable ask because you have more important plans, you're not severing connection, you're preserving it in a healthier way. Because any relationship that requires you to sacrifice self-respect was never built to last. In Stoic philosophy, boundaries are signs of reason and dignity. A person of dignity doesn't let others barge into their life, nor do they explode when those lines are crossed. They simply stand firm, speak clearly, and do not retreat under pressure. This is not stubbornness, it's grounded strength. And that strength carries a quiet kind of power, not loud, not flashy, but impossible to ignore. You don't need to declare that you have high standards. Just live by them, from the work you accept, the relationships you keep, to the way you decline without fuss or justification. Others will understand. Some things need not be said. When your actions are consistent, respect will come naturally. People sense it. Here is someone who knows what they want, knows who they are, and isn't easily moved. In truth, those with boundaries aren't unfriendly. They simply cause others to be more careful, more thoughtful, and more respectful in their approach. They don't make people feel free to do anything. And that's why, when they give their presence or their approval, it carries weight. Because their presence isn't freely given. They're not everywhere, not agreeable to everything, not accepting of what makes them lose themselves. And that's why boundaries don't distance you. They make you worthy of respect. 4. Silence is not defeat, it's strategy. We live in an age where presence is nearly always tied to speaking. You're taught to respond quickly, to speak up, to voice your opinion in order to be seen, to not fall behind. In such a world, silence is often misunderstood as submission, as weakness, as losing. But in truth, silence, when chosen deliberately, is a powerful strategy. It isn't a sign of having nothing to say, but a decision not to speak when speaking adds no value. There are those who never allow themselves to be dragged into pointless debates. They don't bite at provocations. Don't answer every sarcastic jab. Don't correct every misunderstanding in every conversation. They can listen, They can observe, but they don't rush to speak. It's not silence from helplessness, but the silence of someone who knows that reaction is not always resolution, and that sometimes the lack of response is the most effective reply. When others stir conflict, they don't engage. When attacked, they don't retaliate with words because they know not every battle is worth fighting. You've likely felt it before, a moment when someone insults you, and every instinct within wants to speak, to defend, to reclaim your dignity. But then you choose silence. At first, it may feel like losing, but later you realize you lost nothing. On the contrary, you kept your calm, your energy, your position, and the other person, no matter how much they say, ends up talking to themselves. When you stay silent, you remove their stage. You refuse to play a role in a needless performance. And without a scene partner, the show ends quickly. In many situations, silence is how you protect your inner freedom. You don't respond, not because you have nothing to say, but because you don't need to be it. You don't reply to attacks not from fear, but because you refuse to hand over control of your emotions. Every time you remain silent at the right moment, you are practicing a rare form of emotional discipline, the kind that refuses to be governed by conflict or outside pressure. In Stoic philosophy, silence is the space between stimulus and response. That small gap is where reason takes control. Epictetus once said, "It's not things that hurt us, but our interpretation of them." And silence is the chance to reinterpret before emotion speaks for you. Those who rush to speak often do not understand themselves. Those who know how to be silent have already realized not everything requires a reply to be resolved. Think of the most impactful people you've encountered, not the ones who talked endlessly, but those who made others pause with a single sentence. They didn't speak constantly. They chose their moment, and that anticipation gave their words weight. It's silence that gives speech its strength. And when you understand that, you begin to value silence as a vital part of communication. In your personal life, too, you don't need to raise your voice to win every argument. You don't need to prove you're right by being louder. When you choose silence, you show others that you don't need victory to feel complete. And that makes you harder to predict, harder to manipulate, and deeply compelling. Silence doesn't erase you, it sharpens you. So next time someone provokes you or drags you into a heated moment, try this. Say nothing. Take a deep breath, look directly, and hold that silence like a conscious choice. You'll see, not the one who speaks most loudly holds the room. Sometimes it's the one who remains silent who controls it completely. 5. You don't need to be noticed to be valuable. We grow up in a culture that treats attention as a measure of worth. As children, we're praised when we raise our hand, acknowledged when we're on stage, liked when we attract notice. As we grow, this gets reinforced through social media, the press, work, and relationships. The one seen is successful. The one unmentioned is considered invisible. But here's a truth you only realize when you begin turning inward. You don't need to be constantly noticed to hold value. In fact, your real value doesn't lie in how many eyes are watching, but in who you are when no one is. A person doesn't need constant presence to be impactful. They don't need to speak often, overshare, or show up in every conversation, event, or screen. They appear when needed, stay silent when not. And that mindful choice creates a different kind of presence, quieter, deeper, but unmistakably felt. They don't try to be seen, because they know they are still themselves, whether anyone's watching or not. In the workplace, the most vocal person isn't always the most insightful. Some choose to stay quiet, observe, take notes, and only speak when it truly matters. They don't speak to perform, they speak to guide. And because they don't talk often, people listen when they do. It's their lack of attention-seeking that makes their presence more noticeable. Their impact doesn't come from appearance or communication style, but from inner depth because they've come to know themselves and no longer rely on others' reactions to define their worth. In relationships, you see this clearly too. Some always need affirmation daily messages, constant praise, to be the center of attention. Others don't. They don't need continual notice to feel loved. They don't need external proof to know they matter. They are steady, at peace, and don't expect the world to revolve around them. They bring no noise, yet offer the calm others seek. Because they don't need attention, they don't pressure others to constantly validate them. In Stoic philosophy, this is clear. You don't exist to be seen. You exist to live true to your nature. Marcus Aurelius once wrote that if you always need the crowd's approval, you will forever be its prisoner. Freedom begins when you're no longer driven to prove, no longer obsessed with being present, stand out, or applauded. You begin living from within, and that kind of life needs no applause to be real. You might think that if you stay silent, don't update often, don't show up much, people will forget you. But think again. The people who have shaped you most, were they everywhere? Always present? Or were they the ones who with a single sentence, a single gesture, a single timely appearance left a lasting impact? True value isn't in how often you're seen, but in the depth you bring when you are. And sometimes, absence itself becomes presence when your life carries weight, not just visibility. The world today craves quiet but is addicted to noise. In a sea of people trying to stand out, the one who steps back not out of fear but sufficiency stands apart. And that kind of difference cannot be imitated. When you no longer need attention to feel worthy, you've reached a profound state of freedom. And that freedom is what makes you magnetic, not because you tried, but because you didn't need to. 6. Keeping apart for yourself creates lasting appeal. There's something few people teach you as you grow up. Sharing more doesn't always mean connecting more, and revealing everything doesn't guarantee you'll be understood. In an age that urges full exposure from social media, even communication advice, the one who keeps apart to themselves becomes rare. But in that rarity lies their pull. Not because they're artificially mysterious, but because they don't live to be dissected. They live with depth. And that depth isn't for display, it's theirs to hold. We're naturally drawn to what we don't fully understand. What's predictable fades quickly. What holds some ambiguity, some part unspoken, keeps us returning, keeps us wondering. What is this person really thinking? When you share just enough, speak at the right moment, express only where needed, and keep the rest to yourself, you create a delicate line between sincerity and self-protection. No one needs to know everything inside you to feel your presence. In truth, the less you say, the more your presence carries depth and weight. Those who keep apart for themselves are not cold. They still connect, still love, still share. But they know not everyone deserves all of them. They're not closed off, they're selective. They don't withhold out of fear, but out of respect for their own inner world. What's deepest in them isn't thrown out for approval, isn't used to gain sympathy. It's preserved, guarded, and revealed only when the moment is right. So when they open up, it's never random. It means something. We've become used to sharing everything. A pretty meal, a fleeting emotion, a new compliment, everything becomes material to show. But have you noticed? The more we share, the more empty we feel. Because the most essential part of us, the quiet core, hasn't been kept to nourish us. Real appeal doesn't come from people knowing everything about you. It comes from their realization that, no matter how close, they'll never fully grasp you. And that makes them want to understand more, not because you pushed them away, but because you didn't live to be exposed. In relationships, those who keep a part to themselves are respected. They don't get swept up by emotion. They don't let everyone touch the deepest part of them. And that protects them, but also makes their presence special. Because when you can't fully possess someone, even a piece they offer becomes precious. Every word, every glance, every personal story they choose to share feels significant. Because you know they chose you, not because they share with everyone. From a Stoic lens, keeping part of your inner world isn't manipulation, it's self-mastery. Those who live by reason understand that personal energy is limited. They don't let emotion, story, or insecurity spill everywhere because they know what must be kept to preserve inner balance. Their restraint, their discernment, their care in sharing it doesn't make them distant. It makes them trustworthy, because someone who can't hold anything for themselves can't be trusted to hold others either. If you want to be magnetic without effort, try keeping something for yourself. Don't tell every story. Don't explain every feeling. Don't react to everything. Let others observe, feel, and gently approach the deeper layers of who you are with patience and subtlety. When they sense that you don't need to be fully understood, yet you're fully present, that's when they begin to respect you. Because what's held back doesn't weaken connection, it deepens it, strengthens it, and makes it last. 7. Not being carried away by emotion is the mark of maturity. There is one clear sign of maturity in thought and character: the ability to feel emotions without being ruled by them. A mature person is not someone without emotions, but someone who can stand in the middle of an internal storm without being swept away. They don't let anger make them say words they can't take back. Don't let fear pull them away from what matters. Don't let hurt make them lose their reason. They still feel all those things like any human, but they know how to place a space between emotion and action. And that space is where reason takes control. We're often taught how to express emotion, but rarely taught how to master it. We're encouraged to let it all out, to be true to how you feel, as if reacting immediately is a sign of courage. But not all expression is liberation, and not everything spoken leads to self-understanding. Sometimes, what you need isn't to speak, but to be clear-minded enough not to say what you'll regret. In certain moments, instinctive reaction may look strong, but it comes at the cost of calm. And with that, the ability to steer your life. A mature person isn't a slave to emotion. They don't deny emotion, nor do they suppress it in a harmful way. Instead, they observe. They recognize when they're angry, sad, anxious, and allow those emotions to exist without letting them control behavior. They can stay quiet in an argument not because they have nothing to say, but because they know speaking now would only release, not resolve. They can walk away from confrontation not out of fear, but because they understand peace is more valuable than winning. The ability to pause before reacting even for a moment is what separates instinct from discipline. In Stoic thought, this is one of the foundations of freedom. Epictetus once said, "We are not disturbed by events, but by our view of them." When you no longer let emotion dictate every reaction, you begin to see more clearly. You don't react out of impulse, you respond from a place of strength. And in that steadiness, you discover a quiet kind of power, one that earns respect not by display, but by restraint. You don't need to control every situation, but if you can control how you respond to every situation, you've already won half of life. Those who are easily moved by emotion are easily controlled by others. One harsh word makes them angry. One indifferent glance makes them doubt themselves. One moment of silence from another can send them into panic. But those who don't react right away are different. They pause, they assess, they ask, where is this emotion coming from? Is it worth acting on? And sometimes, choosing not to respond is already the wisest response. In daily life, you'll face many moments that test your emotional discipline. A loved one says something hurtful. A colleague attacks you publicly. A stranger acts disrespectfully. The easy response is to lash out, to vent, or to withdraw in silent pain. But the harder and deeper choice is to stand still in the storm, to observe the anger without letting it drive, to acknowledge the pain without letting it tear you apart. That is when you begin to master your life, one action, one word, one decision at a time. 8. Inner stability is the foundation of trust. In all relationships, from work to personal life, the person who makes us feel most secure is not the one who speaks well or acts boldly, but the one who maintains inner stability. They're not swept up by shifting moods, not shaken by changing circumstances, not quick to react when things go wrong. They're the kind of person you can breathe easier around, feel safer with, because you know they won't suddenly snap or let anger take the wheel at critical moments. That stability doesn't come from a calm exterior. It's the result of long, patient inner work. The one who stays grounded has learned to sit with fear, walk through confusion, and carry pain without turning bitter. They don't puff themselves up to look strong. They don't control others to feel in control. They simply refuse to let the waves inside break the structure outside. And that is what creates the sense of steadiness others rely on and respect. Think back to a tense meeting, a family argument, or an emergency. In those moments, the person everyone turned to wasn't the loudest, but the one who stayed composed, saw the whole picture, and made clear decisions. They didn't get caught in emotional details. They stood far enough back to see the landscape. That kind of person doesn't need to convince anyone to trust them. Their presence alone is reassurance. Stoic philosophy teaches that calm is not something you're born with, but something you practice, action by action, day by day. You practice it when you choose silence over arguing, when you walk away from the negative instead of diving in, when you keep a promise to yourself rather than betray it to please others. Stability doesn't come from controlling what's outside, but from mastering what's within. And when your inner world is steady, you don't just live better, you become a source of strength for others to live better too. I used to think that in order to earn respect, I had to express more, speak louder, even react faster so I wouldn't be seen as weak. But the more I matured, the more I realized that the people I truly admired weren't the ones who talked the most, but the ones who remained composed in moments where it was easy to lose control. They didn't always speak up, but when they did, others listened. They weren't easily provoked, weren't ruled by other people's emotions, and didn't need to prove anything to carry weight. I started learning from them, little by little, by stopping my urge to react, by practicing silence when needed, and by observing instead of retaliating. And then I realized it was when I stopped trying to be noticed that others began to notice me, naturally. Inner stillness, it turns out, is the most enduring source of magnetism. If today's lesson touched something within you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next content. And finally, remember, you don't need to chase the spotlight to be seen. Just keep your inner flame steady, and the world will eventually feel your light. See you in the next video.